Amidst the rise of the Third Reich, as Adolf Hitler's ominous shadow stretched across Germany in the 1930s, a malignant seed was sown within the hearts and minds of the nation's youth. This was the Hitler Youth, a malevolent apparatus whose sole purpose was to breed a new generation of National Socialists, unfailingly loyal to the Führer and his grotesque ideology. But what were the dark practices that took place behind those militaristic ranks, and what became of the children trapped within this terrifying machinery? Picture yourself as an adolescent Heinrich Himmler, one of the earliest members of the Hitler Youth, who would later become one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. Or ponder the fate of Sophie Scholl, the brave young woman who dared to resist the Nazi propaganda and paid the ultimate price for her defiance. From early age, these children were subject to grueling indoctrination, harsh physical training, and a twisted portrayal of patriotism, all with the singular aim to forge them into the Führer's perfect soldiers. The Nazi education minister Bernhard Rust once chillingly stated, "The whole purpose of education is to create Nazis." And so, under the deceptive guise of camaraderie and national pride, the Hitler Youth played a pivotal role in shaping a generation that would feed the Nazi war machine. Join us as we journey back to the darkest era of German history, exploring the chilling reality of the Hitler Youth. Welcome to the Diary of Julius Caesar. Seeds of the Swastika, the birth and aims of the Hitler Youth. The Hitler Youth, known in German as the Hitler Jugend, was born out of the turmoil and unrest of post-World War I Germany. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended the war, left the country humiliated and economically crippled. This atmosphere of desperation and bitterness provided fertile ground for the rise of extremist political ideologies, among which Adolf Hitler's National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party, gained prominence. The early roots of the Hitler Youth can be traced back to 1922, with the formation of the Jugendbund der NSDAP, Youth League of the NSDAP. However, the organization as we know it today was formally established on July 4, 1926, under the leadership of Kurt Gruber. From the very beginning, the primary objectives of the Hitler Youth were to indoctrinate German youth with Nazi ideology and groom them for future leadership roles within the party and the nation. One of the most influential figures in shaping the Hitler Youth was Baldur von Schirach, who was appointed the Reich Youth leader in 1931. Under von Schirach's guidance, the organization adopted a highly regimented structure and expanded its reach throughout Germany. Von Schirach once proclaimed, "The weak must be chiseled away. I want young men and women who can suffer pain. A young German must be swift as a greyhound, as tough as leather, and as hard as Krupp's steel." This quote exemplified the ethos of the Hitler Youth and the ideals they sought to instill in their members. The activities and programs of the Hitler Youth centered around several key areas, including physical fitness, paramilitary training, and ideological indoctrination. Rallies and marches were commonplace, often accompanied by Nazi party songs and propaganda speeches. Members were encouraged to embrace the concept of the Volksgemeinschaft, or the national community, and to view themselves as part of a greater whole, with their loyalty and allegiance owing first and foremost to Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Anecdotes from this period reveal the extent to which the Hitler Youth sought to control the lives of its members. For example, in 1934, the organization launched a campaign against degenerate music, specifically targeting jazz and swing, which they viewed as representing the antithesis of the Germanic spirit. Members were encouraged to denounce and destroy records, and in some cases, even report musicians or music enthusiasts to the authorities. This campaign was just one of many examples of the pervasive influence of the Hitler Youth on German society. Another interesting aspect of the organization's history is its relationship with the Catholic Church. Although many within the Church opposed the Nazi Party's ideology, there were instances of collaboration between the two organizations. For example, in the early 1930s, Catholic youth organizations were pressured to merge with the Hitler Youth. This union was formalized in the 1933 Concordat between the Holy See and the German Reich, which granted the Church a degree of autonomy in exchange for its cooperation with the regime. However, as the Nazi Party's persecution of religious groups intensified, the relationship between the Church and the Hitler Youth became increasingly strained. The Hitler Youth played a crucial role in the rise of the Nazi Party to power. By winning over the hearts and minds of the German youth, they helped to create an environment in which dissent was suppressed and loyalty to the regime was unquestioned. As Adolf Hitler himself once said, "He alone who owns the youth gains the future." The Hitler Youth represented the realization of this vision, serving as a powerful tool in the hands of the Nazi Party as it ascended to power and sought to reshape German society in its own image. Throughout the 1930s, membership in the Hitler Youth grew exponentially. By the time World War II broke out in 1939, the organization boasted millions of members. This growth was fueled not only by the appeal of its programs and ideology, but also by the fact that membership eventually became mandatory for all eligible German youth. The indoctrination of the young generation proved to be a valuable asset to the Nazi regime, as these individuals would go on to play crucial roles in supporting the war effort and perpetuating the horrors of the Holocaust. The influence of the Hitler Youth on the lives of its members cannot be overstated. For many, their experiences within the organization would shape their worldview for the rest of their lives. Some would come to regret their involvement and struggle to come to terms with the atrocities committed in the name of the Nazi Party. Others would remain steadfast in their loyalty, even as the tide of war turned against Germany and the regime's crimes became increasingly apparent. Unified by the swastika, the intricate structure of the Hitler Youth. The Hitler Youth was an elaborate and highly structured organization designed to encompass German youth from all walks of life and to ensure that they were thoroughly exposed to Nazi ideology throughout their formative years. As a result, the organization was divided into several branches, each catering to a different age group or gender. This comprehensive approach allowed the Nazi Party to instill its values in the younger generation, grooming them to become devoted supporters and future leaders of the Third Reich. The youngest members of the Hitler Youth were boys aged 10, 14 who belonged to the Deutsches Jungvolk, or German young people. This division aimed to introduce young boys to the ideals of National Socialism, while also providing them with a sense of camaraderie and belonging. Activities for the Jungvolk included hiking trips, camping excursions and sports competitions, as well as lessons on history, geography, and racial theory. The organization's motto, Für Führer, Volk und Vaterland, for the Führer, the people, and the fatherland, encapsulated the spirit of loyalty and dedication that was expected of its members. Boys aged 14, 18 belonged to the Hitlerjugend, or Hitler Youth proper. This division focused on further developing the skills and knowledge acquired in the Jungvolk, with a particular emphasis on paramilitary training and physical fitness. Members of the Hitler Youth were required to participate in regular marches and drills, as well as to attend courses on topics such as first aid, map reading, and firearms handling. As they progressed through the ranks, older members could also take on leadership roles, giving them valuable experience in organizing and managing their peers. Girls, on the other hand, were integrated into the Bund Deutscher Madel, BDM, or League of German Girls. The BDM was divided into two age groups, the Jungmadelbund for girls aged 10, 14, and the BDM proper for those aged 14, 21. The activities within the BDM were designed to prepare girls for their future roles as wives, mothers, and supporters of the Nazi regime. They were taught the importance of racial purity and the virtues of the ideal German woman, as well as practical skills such as sewing, cooking, and childcare. In addition, the BDM placed a strong emphasis on physical fitness, with members participating in sports and outdoor activities. Trude Moore, the first Reichsreferentin of the BDM, once said, "We must raise a generation that knows how to be silent and to endure, that sacrifices without grumbling, that is tough and hard." This quote exemplifies the expectations placed upon young women in Nazi Germany, who were seen as crucial to the perpetuation of the Aryan race and the continuation of the National Socialist project. The structure of the Hitler Youth and its various divisions were not only designed to provide age-appropriate indoctrination, but also to foster a sense of competition and achievement among its members. As they progressed through the organization, young people were awarded various ranks, badges, and honors, both for their participation in activities and their adherence to Nazi ideals. This system of rewards and recognition served to further strengthen the bonds between the members and the organization, ensuring their loyalty and commitment to the cause. An interesting anecdote from this period involves a young Joseph Ratzinger, who would later become Pope Benedict XVI. Ratzinger was enrolled in the Hitler Youth during his teenage years, although he and his family were known to be critical of the Nazi regime. Ratzinger's experiences during this time, as well as his subsequent journey to the highest office in the Catholic Church, offer a unique perspective on the complex relationship between the Hitler Youth, religious institutions, and the individuals caught in the midst of these competing forces. Lured by the swastika, the tactics of recruitment and retention in the Hitler Youth. The process of recruitment and enrollment into the Hitler Youth was a multifaceted endeavor, relying on a combination of propaganda, peer pressure, and eventually legislation to entice and retain members. The Nazi Party's cunning tactics ensured that millions of young Germans were exposed to their extremist ideology, effectively solidifying their hold on the hearts and minds of an entire generation. In the early years of the Hitler Youth, recruitment efforts focused on promoting the organization's exciting and adventurous activities. Boys and girls alike were drawn to the promise of camaraderie, sports, and outdoor excursions. Nazi propaganda frequently showcased the fun and excitement of life within the Hitler Youth, with images of smiling, uniformed children engaged in various pursuits, from hiking to playing musical instruments. This carefully curated image painted the organization as an attractive alternative to the mundane, everyday life that many young people experienced in post-World War I Germany. Another key factor in the recruitment process was the appeal to national pride and a sense of purpose. The Nazi Party framed the Hitler Youth as an opportunity for young people to contribute to the betterment of their nation, cultivating a sense of duty and responsibility. This approach resonated with many youths who felt disillusioned by the economic and political instability of the Weimar Republic. As the Nazis rose to power, joining the Hitler Youth became synonymous with patriotism and loyalty to the fatherland. Peer pressure also played a significant role in the recruitment and retention of members. As the organization grew in size and influence, it became increasingly difficult for young people to resist the pull of the Hitler Youth. Those who refused to join were often ostracized or ridiculed by their peers, and many felt compelled to participate simply to avoid social isolation. This dynamic was further exacerbated by the involvement of teachers and other authority figures, who often encouraged or even required their students to join the organization. The Nazi Party also made a concerted effort to target influential youth organizations and absorb them into the Hitler Youth. In 1933, for example, they successfully merged the Catholic Youth League with their own organization, securing the allegiance of thousands of young people. By co-opting existing groups and dismantling those that refused to cooperate, the Nazis were able to rapidly expand the reach and influence of the Hitler Youth. As the Nazi regime solidified its control over Germany, the pressure to join the Hitler Youth only intensified. In December 1936, the Hitler Youth Law was passed, making membership in the organization virtually mandatory for all eligible German youth. This legislation was followed by the Reich Youth Service Law in 1939, which further solidified the compulsory nature of Hitler Youth membership. With these laws in place, the organization swelled to encompass millions of young people, ensuring that the vast majority of German youth were exposed to the tenets of National Socialism. An interesting anecdote from this period involves Sophie Scholl, a young German woman who would later become a member of the White Rose resistance movement. Despite being a member of the BDM as a teenager, Scholl later denounced the Nazi regime and actively worked to undermine its efforts, ultimately paying for her defiance with her life. Scholl's story illustrates the complex and varied experiences of those who were swept up in the tide of the Hitler Youth, with some ultimately choosing to resist the regime they had once supported. Molding the Führer's future, the multifaceted education of the Hitler Youth. The education and training provided within the Hitler Youth was carefully designed to produce well-rounded, obedient, and physically fit individuals who were deeply committed to the principles of National Socialism. By offering a diverse array of activities and programs, the organization sought to instill in its members the skills and attitudes necessary to serve the Nazi regime and further its nefarious goals. One of the primary objectives of the Hitler Youth was political indoctrination. Members were exposed to Nazi ideology through various means, including lectures, group discussions, and propaganda materials. The content of this education focused on promoting the superiority of the Aryan race, the importance of national unity, and the necessity of unquestioning loyalty to the Führer. Young people were taught to revere Adolf Hitler as a near deity, with many pledging their allegiance to him in solemn ceremonies. The Hitler Youth also placed a strong emphasis on physical fitness and sports, with members participating in a wide range of activities such as track and field, gymnastics, swimming, and skiing. These pursuits were not merely for recreation or enjoyment. They were an integral part of the organization's mission to forge a generation of strong, healthy, and disciplined individuals who would be capable of carrying out the demands of the Nazi regime. This focus on physical prowess was epitomized by the phrase Kraft durch Freude, strength through joy, which was emblazoned on the uniforms of Hitler Youth members. Military training was another key component of the Hitler Youth's education program. As members progressed through the ranks, they were introduced to various aspects of military life, including marching, drilling, and the use of firearms. This paramilitary training was intended to prepare young people for future service in the German armed forces, as well as to cultivate a warrior ethos that would serve the Nazi cause. Many high-ranking officers within the Wehrmacht and the SS had their roots in the Hitler Youth, a testament to the effectiveness of the organization's training methods. In addition to these physical and ideological pursuits, the Hitler Youth also provided its members with vocational guidance and training. This aspect of the organization's curriculum was designed to ensure that young people were equipped with the skills needed to contribute to the German war machine and the economy. Members could choose from a range of vocational paths, including agriculture, industry, and the civil service. By offering practical training in these fields, the Hitler Youth aimed to foster a sense of purpose and pride in its members, while also ensuring that they would be valuable assets to the Nazi regime. One fascinating aspect of the Hitler Youth's education program was the Landjahr, a compulsory year of agricultural service for members aged 16 to 18. During this time, young people were sent to rural areas to work on farms and gain first-hand experience in agriculture. This program was intended to instill in members an appreciation for the importance of the land and the value of hard work, as well as to provide much-needed labor for the German agricultural sector. Mothers of the Reich, the unique experiences of girls and women in the BDM. The experiences of female members in the Bund Deutscher Madel, BDM, the League of German Girls, were both distinct and integral to the overall mission of the Hitler Youth. While the activities and education provided to girls within the BDM were designed to prepare them for their roles as wives and mothers in the Third Reich, they also served to cultivate a sense of camaraderie, loyalty, and commitment to the Nazi regime. In contrast to their male counterparts, who were exposed to rigorous military training and political indoctrination, the primary focus of the BDM was to promote traditional feminine virtues and skills. Girls in the organization were taught the importance of cleanliness, thriftiness, and modesty, as well as the value of hard work and self-sacrifice. Through activities such as cooking, sewing, and childcare, young women were prepared for their future roles as wives and mothers, with an emphasis on the need to produce and raise healthy Aryan children for the benefit of the nation. Physical fitness was another important aspect of the BDM's curriculum, as it was believed that a strong and healthy body was essential for fulfilling the duties of motherhood. To this end, girls participated in sports and outdoor activities such as hiking, gymnastics, and swimming. As with the male members of the Hitler Youth, the emphasis on physical fitness was intended to forge a generation of robust and capable individuals who would be well equipped to serve the needs of the Third Reich. While the BDM was primarily focused on preparing girls for their domestic roles, the organization also provided opportunities for female members to contribute to the Nazi cause in more direct ways. Many girls were involved in social welfare programs, such as providing aid to families affected by the war or assisting with the resettlement of ethnic Germans in occupied territories. These activities allowed young women to experience a sense of purpose and pride in their contributions to the nation, while also fostering a spirit of community and cooperation among members. The BDM also played a key role in promoting and enforcing the racial policies of the Nazi regime. Girls were educated on the importance of racial purity and the alleged threat posed by Jews and other undesirable elements within society. As members of the BDM, girls were expected to adhere to strict standards of racial and moral purity and were encouraged to report any instances of deviation from these standards. In this way, young women were enlisted as agents of the regime, actively working to uphold and enforce the principles of National Socialism. One notable figure within the BDM was Trude Mohr, who served as the organization's first Reichsreferentin, national speaker, from 1934 to 1937. Under Mohr's leadership, the BDM expanded rapidly, incorporating thousands of young women into its ranks and solidifying its role as a key instrument of the Nazi regime. Mohr's tenure was marked by a strong emphasis on discipline and order, as well as a keen focus on promoting the values of loyalty and dedication to the Führer. Divided loyalties, the impact of the Hitler Youth on family life and trust. The Hitler Youth's pervasive influence extended beyond its members and permeated family life, creating tension, mistrust, and even fear within the sanctuary of the home. By encouraging children to report disloyal behavior or speech by their parents, the Nazi regime turned the youngest members of society into informants, effectively driving a wedge between generations and undermining the traditional bonds of family loyalty. The process of indoctrination within the Hitler Youth was so thorough that many members came to view their allegiance to the Führer as paramount, even above their loyalty to their own families. The organization's leaders often emphasized the importance of reporting any instances of dissent or disloyalty, urging members to be vigilant in identifying and exposing those who did not fully adhere to the principles of National Socialism. This expectation extended to the members' own families, where children were encouraged to report their parents if they expressed doubts, criticisms, or opposition to the Nazi regime. This policy had a profound impact on family dynamics, creating an atmosphere of mistrust and suspicion within the home. Parents were forced to be cautious about what they said and did in the presence of their children, lest they be reported to the authorities and face punishment or persecution. This climate of fear and suspicion only served to strengthen the bond between Hitler Youth members and the Nazi regime, as young people increasingly looked to the organization for guidance and support in place of their own families. One chilling example of this dynamic can be found in the story of Helmut Hubener, a young German who became involved in anti-Nazi resistance activities during World War II. In 1942, Hubener was betrayed by a fellow member of the Hitler Youth who reported his activities to the Gestapo. Despite being only 17 years old, Hubener was executed for his resistance efforts, a stark reminder of the power and reach of the Hitler Youth and the devastating consequences of divided loyalties. Another notable case is that of the Edelweiss Pirates, a loosely organized group of young people who resisted the Nazi regime and rejected the strictures of the Hitler Youth. Many of these young rebels were reported to the authorities by their own siblings or classmates who were members of the Hitler Youth. The tension between these two groups offers a glimpse into the broader conflict between family loyalty and allegiance to the regime that played out in countless homes across Germany during this period. The impact of the Hitler Youth on family life can also be seen in the experiences of those who survived the war and its aftermath. Many former members have spoken about the guilt and shame they felt for betraying their families and contributing to the suffering of their fellow citizens. For some, this burden proved too heavy to bear, leading to strained relationships and a lifelong struggle to come to terms with their past. The global reach of the swastika, Hitler Youth's international connections, and the exportation of Nazi ideology. While the Hitler Youth's primary focus was on the indoctrination and mobilization of young people within Germany, the organization's ambitions were not limited by national borders. With the intention of exporting Nazi ideology abroad and forging connections with like-minded groups in other countries, the Hitler Youth engaged in various exchanges and partnerships, thereby extending the reach of their influence beyond the confines of the Third Reich. One of the earliest international connections established by the Hitler Youth was with the Balilla, the youth organization of Benito Mussolini's fascist regime in Italy. In the years leading up to World War II, members of the Hitler Youth and the Balilla participated in joint events such as sports competitions and cultural exchanges, which served to foster a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose between the two groups. These interactions allowed for the exchange of ideas and tactics, as both organizations sought to advance their respective ideologies and consolidate power within their nations. As the Nazi regime expanded its territorial ambitions, the Hitler Youth also sought to establish connections with youth organizations in occupied countries. For example, in Norway, the National Socialists youth wing, the Ungherden, adopted many of the practices and principles of the Hitler Youth, as their leaders sought to align themselves with the powerful German occupiers. Similarly, the Jeunesse Legionnaire in Vichy, France, the Joodstorm in the Netherlands, and the Flamische Hitler Jugend in German-occupied Belgium all developed close ties with the Hitler Youth, adopting elements of its structure, training, and ideology. These connections allowed the Nazi regime to exert influence over the younger generations in occupied territories and to promote the idea of a unified, fascist Europe under German leadership. Furthermore, these relationships facilitated the dissemination of Nazi propaganda, as the Hitler Youth provided resources and expertise to their international counterparts to help them develop their own indoctrination materials and methods. Beyond Europe, the Hitler Youth also sought to establish connections with groups in other parts of the world. One such example is the link between the Hitler Youth and the Silver Shirts, an American fascist organization active in the 1930s. While the extent of their collaboration remains a subject of historical debate, there is evidence to suggest that members of the Silver Shirts and the Hitler Youth engaged in correspondence and shared propaganda materials, reflecting a mutual interest in promoting their respective ideologies on a global scale. Moreover, the Nazi regime made concerted efforts to export its ideas and principles through international exchange programs, such as the German-American Bunds exchange program in the United States. This initiative aimed to foster understanding and sympathy for the Nazi cause among young Americans of German descent, offering them the opportunity to travel to Germany and participate in Hitler Youth activities. These exchanges sought to promote cultural affinity and ideological alignment between the two nations, despite the growing political tensions that would ultimately lead to war. The Spirit of Rebellion, stories of young dissenters in the shadow of the Hitler Youth. While the Hitler Youth's influence and power were pervasive throughout Nazi Germany, not all young people were willing to blindly follow the regime's dictates. In the face of unimaginable pressure and danger, some courageous individuals and groups found ways to oppose or resist the Hitler Youth and the broader Nazi regime. Their stories of defiance and dissent serve as a testament to the resilience and indomitable spirit of those who dared to stand against the tide of tyranny. Among the most renowned examples of youthful resistance to the Hitler Youth and the Nazi regime was the White Rose movement. This non-violent intellectual resistance group was founded by a group of students from the University of Munich, including siblings Hans and Sophie Scholl. Motivated by their deep convictions and moral principles, the members of the White Rose produced and distributed leaflets denouncing the atrocities committed by the Nazis and advocating for passive resistance against the regime. Despite their peaceful methods, the Scholls and their fellow White Rose members paid the ultimate price for their dissent, as they were arrested, tried, and executed in 1943. Their legacy endures as a powerful symbol of moral courage in the face of oppression. The Edelweiss Pirates were another group of young dissenters who actively resisted the Hitler Youth and the Nazi regime. Comprised primarily of working-class youth, the Edelweiss Pirates rejected the strict regimentation and ideology of the Hitler Youth in favor of a more independent and free-spirited lifestyle. They engaged in acts of sabotage, distributed anti-Nazi leaflets, and provided shelter and support to deserters and escaped prisoners. As their activities became more overt and confrontational, the Nazis cracked down on the Edelweiss Pirates, executing some members and imprisoning others. Nevertheless, the spirit of defiance embodied by these young rebels endured, inspiring others to resist the totalitarian regime. In addition to these organized resistance groups, other young people found more subtle ways to oppose the Hitler Youth and the Nazi regime. One such example can be found in the Swing Kids, a countercultural movement that emerged in response to the strict cultural restrictions imposed by the Nazis. These teenagers, many of whom came from middle-class backgrounds, were drawn to the vibrant and rebellious music of the American jazz and swing scenes, which stood in stark contrast to the sanitized, state-approved music promoted by the Hitler Youth. By embracing the cosmopolitan and multicultural aspects of swing music, the Swing Kids were able to express their individuality and defy the Nazi regime's attempts to control every aspect of their lives. Youth on the front lines. The crucial and heartbreaking role of Hitler Youth in World War II. As the flames of World War II spread across Europe, the Hitler Youth found themselves drawn into the conflict in various capacities, playing critical roles both on the home front and as combatants in the war's later stages. The impact of their involvement in the war was not only felt by the nation, but also left indelible marks on the young lives that were irrevocably altered by the horrors they experienced. At the onset of the war, the Hitler Youth were initially tasked with supporting the home front. They collected scrap metal, participated in agricultural work, and assisted in air raid preparations. As the war progressed and the adult population was increasingly conscripted, the young members found themselves filling more significant roles in civil defense and industry, often working in factories and mines to maintain the nation's production capacity. These contributions, although vital to the German war effort, exposed the young members to dangerous working conditions and the hardships of a nation at war. But perhaps the most poignant and heart-rending aspect of the Hitler Youth's involvement in the war was their eventual deployment as combatants. As the tide of the conflict turned against Germany and the military faced severe manpower shortages, the regime increasingly relied on the young members of the Hitler Youth to replenish its ranks. Boys as young as 16, and in some cases even younger, were conscripted into the armed forces and sent to the front lines. These young soldiers were often woefully unprepared for the reality of war, despite their extensive training in the Hitler Youth. Many had been indoctrinated with the belief that they were fighting for the greater glory of the Third Reich, and as such, they often displayed fanatical devotion and bravery in battle. This zeal, combined with their lack of experience, resulted in devastating losses and casualties among the Hitler Youth soldiers. One of the most notorious examples of the Hitler Youth's involvement in combat took place during the Battle of Berlin in the spring of 1945. As the Soviet Red Army encircled the German capital, Hitler Youth members were among the last-ditch defenders of the city. Armed with little more than rifles and Panzerfausts, these young combatants faced overwhelming odds and suffered catastrophic losses in their desperate attempts to hold back the Soviet onslaught. From the ashes, dismantling the Hitler Youth and healing the scars of a nation. In the aftermath of the fall of the Third Reich, the process of denazification and the dismantling of the Hitler Youth began in earnest. As the Allies sought to purge Germany of the poisonous ideologies that had fueled the war and rebuild the shattered nation, the Hitler Youth presented a unique challenge. With millions of young people having been indoctrinated into the beliefs of the Nazi regime, the task of re-educating and reintegrating them into a new democratic Germany was monumental. The Allies quickly moved to dissolve the Hitler Youth Organization. In October 1945, the Control Council Law No. 10 declared the Hitler Youth and all its affiliated groups to be illegal, and efforts began to dismantle the organization's structures and institutions. This process involved the removal of Nazi symbols and propaganda, the closure of training facilities and meeting halls, and the confiscation of organizational assets. However, the more difficult task lay in addressing the lingering effects of Nazi indoctrination on the youth of Germany. The process of denazification sought to re-educate the young people who had been immersed in the ideology of the Third Reich, instilling in them the values of democracy, tolerance, and critical thinking. This effort was carried out through a variety of means, including the reformation of the education system, the establishment of new youth organizations, and the widespread dissemination of information that exposed the true nature of the Nazi regime and its crimes. In addition to these efforts, the Allies also sought to hold accountable those individuals who had been directly involved in the crimes and atrocities committed by the Hitler Youth. While many of the organization's leaders were prosecuted and sentenced for their roles in the war and the Holocaust, the vast majority of its rank-and-file members were considered too young to be held legally responsible for their actions. Instead, these individuals were often subjected to denazification screenings and required to participate in re-education programs. The process of denazification and the dismantling of the Hitler Youth had profound and lasting effects on both the individuals who had been members and German society as a whole. For many former members, the exposure of the true nature of the Nazi regime and its crimes brought feelings of guilt, shame, and disillusionment. Some struggled to come to terms with their own complicity in the regime's actions and to reconcile their past actions with their newfound understanding of the world. As we reach the end of our journey through the tumultuous history of the Hitler Youth, we are reminded of the lasting impact that the organization had on the lives of millions of young people and the consequences of indoctrination on society. The story of the Hitler Youth serves as a stark warning of the dangers that can arise when the minds of the young are manipulated and exploited by a ruthless regime. The harrowing accounts of the experiences of these young people, from their enrollment in the organization to their roles in the war and their subsequent struggles to come to terms with their actions, underscore the importance of fostering empathy, tolerance, and critical thinking in future generations. In the words of philosopher George Santayana, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. As we look back on the Hitler Youth and the devastation they both caused and endured, let us not forget the lessons of history, and let us strive to create a world where the voices of the young are nurtured, encouraged, and guided toward a brighter, more compassionate future. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the Hitler Youth, and until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and never stop learning.